Yeah, it was fun. When I interviewed in 2010, I had no idea what the product did because you couldn't see it. You couldn't go interrogate it until a month into working here. Then I understood more, but now people can understand.
But you're being overly charitable. Then you got to see that the government product was real, but had some real flaws in the code base, and had certain things that had to be extended.
Yeah.
And you saw that the commercial efforts were nascent at best, and that we weren't exactly sure what we were going to build, and we were kind of figuring that out. Or in your version, my version would be figuring out. Your version would be failing. So,
speaking of that, since I was part of that first wave of commercial US, what feels different about this third wave or US commercial?
I could ask you, but I think, first of all, Foundry is objectively the best commercial software product in the world. And again, don't feel free to judge it by the numbers. If you're technical, go look at the product. But, a simple way is just look at the people it's attracting to work at Palantir. They go look at Foundry. You're sitting there as somebody who's a world-class engineer that wants to work somewhere, and they go look at what we're doing and like, okay, I want to work on that. That's why our recruiting is so strong. Post DPO, which again is like highly anomalous. So, we didn't have, our first commercial products were failures, and that's not actually, there's a tendency, unfortunately, outside of the U.S., and it's one of the reasons why the U.S. is so strong in this, that we embrace trying and failing, right? So it's like that, there's no shame in our failures. It's like we learned a lot, and we applied it to when we started building Foundry. But like, we have the best product in the world. We have also a stature and access that we didn't have before. We have resources we didn't have before, both financial and reputational. And we have a lot of knowledge about how you interact with an institution, and how not to interact. And I would say we've, probably matured, at least in our interaction with clients. It's not perfect. It's very hard if you're a technical, it's still the case 70+% of Palantirians that come are technical, and another 10, maybe even more, maybe even 15% of the people who are not software engineers would be called engineers at any other company. Those kind of people, the people that we attract and work hard to retain, don't always interact well with institutions that are, 85% non-technical. And so that's always going to be a problem for us. It is, we're getting better at it, but obviously it's never going to be perfect. And so that there'll always be a way in which, Palantir will overperform technically compared to other institutions, in my humble opinion, dramatically outperform any other institution in the world on the software product. If you just look, like, normal companies have one product that is 10 years old, and then they're acquiring companies. And there's a lot of technical issues in that are massively underestimated, because actually these products the code bases are not meant to come together. But even culturally, there's obviously enormous issues. Palantir has built what amounts to hundreds of products. Like Foundry is hundreds of products in one product, fully integrated, and now will be made also fully disintegrated. So it's like we're really, really good at that, enormously good. So we significantly outperform all others on the technical development and delivery. And again, we deliver. We're outperforming people if you do apples to apples today. If you do apples to apples, we're simultaneously betting on what people are going to be doing tomorrow. And then so it's like a Hegelian thing where when you get to tomorrow, the stuff that even if it worked today is not going to work because it doesn't conform to the expectations of what an enterprise is going to have to do in 5 years. And then you saw this in government with PGE. We saw it in the operational context with Gaia. We've seen it, on the data protection side throughout the history of our company. We saw it in the modularity, non-modularity of Foundry, its ability to integrate massive data sets. In a COVID context, we have limited access to people. We've seen it in industrials and supply chains. We've seen it in emissions context, reducing emissions, in producing more efficient motors. We're seeing it in the AI context. But but you always have to, if the curve is like this in our production, and the normal curve would be like that in software production, the monetizing the curve. So if like a normal company would produce this and then they'll monetize this, we produce like something that like is nearly unbounded, but then we have to do that because our monetization will always be less than the curve itself. Whereas actually what most software companies are doing is they're producing a much smaller integral of like actual software production than the revenue they can extract from that production. Whereas we're producing a nearly unbounded integral where we monetize, we have to learn over time, how do you actually extract revenue value out of that, because the full value of the integral shows up in 5 years.
Yeah.
In the common sense consciousness of more kind of conventional businesses and financial people. And so that's another reason why internally we have to be so focused on building this like transformational software that's existential to the future and highly relevant now, because we will never compete on the axis of extracting more value than the value you've created that other companies are just much better at, you know? And so that's our disability, and we have to just be completely cognizant. If you're going to ship software built by people that are basically nearly all technical to enterprises that are learning how to work with this specific kind of technical product software. It's different than working with a mechanical product. Yeah. You have to massively outperform on the quality of the software side, or it'll be disaster, because you're not going to outperform on quote unquote the sales side. And that's what makes our business very special. Independent of the very cool things we do, and like these fronts, the pure kind of economic, vulgar side of our business is just different than that of a normal software business, because they're very often the products are thin and old, but the sales are new and fresh.
These like conventional companies that have thin product and then, you know, heavily on the sales, that's what they at some point when they made the product, then they stopped, and then
it's very hard. You have to, you know, the genesis of the product and what it became are often different. I mean, very often the genesis of the product are being done by people that we would welcome and would love to be at Palantir. But then it goes into kind of this what you could view as like a digestion system that digests that core product into a more conventional way of delivering it, which has enormous benefits, because you can take a product that has an objective value of X and sell it over 30 years for an objective value of 30 to 50 to 100X, right? The problem there is the culture that can actually do this is really horrific at building new products. So it's like they're great at taking something and like taking its value, and then like the revenues go out like 30 years, and from our perspective, the product was already thin and maybe emaciated and has attributes that wouldn't scale, but you know, but they can do something that we're learning will never be as good at as they are, which is like they can take that and then extend the revenues. And so it's like from the perspective of the kind of person we're recruiting and retaining, this kind of company is just not interesting, right? Because like real world-class engineers don't want to work for like the world's most perfect sales machine, right? With a thin product. And that's the problem for them. And that's why these companies have to really, really do acquisitions. Acquisitions are often fraught with technical issues and cultural issues that people underestimate. But they have to underestimate them, because that's just not, they don't do product development. And so what we do is we are building these products that are just like massively valuable, and then we're allowing the macro conditions to catch up with the product that we build. And it's actually quite dangerous, because, you know, if we're wrong about the macro conditions, we're wrong about the product development, you know, like right now people talk about GDPR, they talk about data protection as if it's a normal thing. You know, you were around even at a time where this was like super radical. So, and like, you're going to see the same thing on like our ability, the way in which we approached AI, completely different than anyone thinks. The way we approach operations in the special forces context is completely different. The way we're going to move the AI technology edge, we're building on assumptions that are not broadly accepted, but they will be accepted. We're betting on that. And pretty certain we're going to be right about a lot of things because we're already seeing that the operational output the delta is much greater than what anyone else has done. That's highly charismatic to people, the people we need to come to Palantir. By the way, it's also charismatic because the cultural aspect, if you're doing this, just makes technical people feel at home. Yeah. Like you're not going to feel at home if it's like a whole Now, of course, as we become a public company, we've had to overlay like salespeople and other things, and then engineers run around and say like are afraid like are we going to become like we're obviously not going to mention names, but all the companies that engineers don't respect that Wall Street people sometimes love, but like actually are like just not charismatic to technical people because they're not actually solving real interesting technical problems, or the problems that they're claiming to solve are never being solved. So like, are we going to become that? And the honest answer is, of course not. But you are going to have to see that we're going to have to change and adapt, and actually find ways to make sure. And by the way, not just for the revenue. It's like the way in which like the more vulgar economics of it are right is revenue is a sign of impact in the sense that you actually got someone to deploy your product and pay for you. And we've been exceedingly good on that score. That's why some of our contracts are so large and meaty, because people see the enormous value we create. Now we're going to democratize this in the sense that more people are going to see that value. But that's the internal dialectic. But like from an internal perspective, we've moved from like here to here, and probably from an external perspective, here to here. But every other company is like, 5,000 kilometers in a different direction on like these things. And like we've moved a kilometer. So it's, but that's basically.
Have you noticed the salespeople? What are the salespeople up to? I'm so deep in product development that I don't notice the change they've brought.
That's the best thing that we want to hear. It's like the best thing for us is to have very impactful people who are selling our product, that the product people and the people who are managing our culture don't really feel the impact of. And so I'm super gratified to hear you say that. I think for us also, it's just not, of course, we can't just run out and hire, like replace our salespeople with salespeople that come from other companies, because it's one thing to sell a product that is like, it's like A plus B plus C minus F. It's another thing to say, we're the whole alphabet, and by the way, we're the alphabet of the future, and you're not going to recognize everything we have. You don't have real criteria to evaluate, but it will work, and over time, you will understand why it works, and you will not be satisfied with these things. This is like the thing that is really interesting about Palantir is once you've bought Palantir, you're not particularly happy with, and you've used it, and it's been implemented in a way that actually works. It's a hard thing because there's a cultural change on both sides probably to actually use the software of the future today. And we've seen this in every context, not just the military, not just Intel, but across industry. But once you've gone through that, you're very unlikely to be satisfied with what you're going to get on the market. And this has given us one of the reasons we've survived despite our charming personalities is people are like, yeah, the personality's a little bit odd, but the software is really performant. And the more you use it, the more performant it becomes for people. But yeah, there's a big cultural issue there.
Is that now that we're open to working with smaller companies as well as big ancient companies, should that change how we
the SPAC things as an example, I think there's a lot of attention on the SPACs because obviously we're investing in some of the most interesting creative companies in the world, and they're relying on Foundry to get the business to a point where it can really be even more disruptive. But I'll tell you, one of the coolest things, obviously, that it would be hard to notice externally is these people are going to push our product and help us understand, like, we can't rest on the fact that we're 5 years ahead of people, but tomorrow you're not 5 years ahead. Like, so it's like, and these people pushing our product and pushing what they're going to do, these are relatively small companies. Compared to, but they're really pushing us to work on, and by the way, it's super inspirational. It's like one of the things that's gotten us through the bad times. You were here for a lot of times that were not great was our customers were so inspirational.
Yeah.
The nice thing about some of these small companies is they're inspirational. They really push us to build things, to do things that we hadn't done before in ways we hadn't thought about, and to deliver value that is not, maybe not in a way that we had preconceived. Yeah. So I think it's easy to focus on the biggest customers, and some of our biggest customers are also some of the coolest customers in the world, no doubt. But a lot of these agile kind of custom customers we're interacting with, either because they're buying our software or because they're using our software, they're just under the gun.
Yeah.
And they've got to produce products that are, to win as an unknown quantity. We used to run around saying truthfully saying we were 5% of the cost and 1% of the time. I believe this to be still true. So what I would tell any entrepreneur that thinks they're going to disrupt, you have to be 20 times better, at least. So it's if you think you're going to disrupt with some linear kind of, we are better on this axis, but worse on that axis, and it's very linear, that's not a tech business, and you won't disrupt. And so we shouldn't forget that at Palantir. By the way, it's refreshing to see other people that are living and breathing that, because we cannot afford to ever forget. If we are not demonstrably better than other people, no one's going to put up with our charming personalities. And that's why you and I get to sit here, here we are sitting, outside of Zurich in Altendorf. We get to really dedicate ourselves to what we care about with a lot of freedoms. Yeah. And it's not, but we only have those freedoms to dedicate ourselves because what we produce is rare and highly differentiated. And no one puts up with us because it's just the same thing as everyone else, but a tiny bit better. Yeah. That's what normal companies can do. So these companies that you don't respect enough because you look at the quality of some of their, but they do things that we can't do that. Yeah. We must never try to. Yeah. We will fail. Yeah. They are much, much better at that than we are. Yeah.
One thing I wonder, the SPAC companies though, they're so ahead of these ancient companies that when we help their supply chain problems, it's I can see that it's going to advance our edge a lot. Is it too far ahead of our old companies, or is that inspiration for the client? Is it supposed to serve
people
as
love
future?
To watch people win. One of the things about a lot of the best companies in the world, and some of which are older, is they know they have to adapt, and it's watching someone else who's adapting quicker and using our products in ways they haven't thought of will get them to adapt. And that's a good thing for everybody. Yeah. I would say that what's special about the American market in particular is its ability to adapt. It's the adaptability, flexibility of the American market is very special. It's less the high level of competence outside of America is also very special, but the adaptability in America is really unique.
Why is
America so adaptable? I don't know, but it's there's a longer intellectual answer, which is America was. This isn't the American perspective of America, but there's a very basic fact of America, which is that you can create your own church or synagogue or mosque, but not just you can go into a society and be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or something else. You can literally decide what your form of Christianity, Islam, or Judaism is. And then it's just true. So it's this ability to freely define your culture and your belief structure, but then hold yourself to that belief structure and then change it again another time in your life is very, very unique. And I don't know of any other culture in the world that has that. If you combine that with the constitutional stability of America in some ways, though obviously there's a lot of political battles, you just have an ability. It's a lack, certainly in the business context, it's a lack. There are ideological truisms taught at business schools, but there are a lot of people like me in business in Palantir who in government, we're very open to things that actually could work, especially in our case, things that will work in the future, but it's not doctrinal. And that leads to a kind of an ability to look at something and say, this looks weird, but I'll give it a try. And then when it looks weird but really works, it's no longer weird. And then this is just maximally advantageous. You saw this like in the U.S. Government context. It's like when we started selling our product, we were saying software is not something. I don't have to tell you this as an engineer. It's just having 1,000 specs of what you think it should do and the way it should work in the future only makes sense if you want to spend money for something that doesn't work. If you want to spend money on something that works, you can pay less money and you show it working today. Okay, common sense to every engineer, not common sense to most institutions, still not enough common sense to most governments in the world. So if you look at what happened in COVID, the governments that took what was not common sense, that the US government became common sense. So like that's how software increasingly is purchased, is one of the reasons we're doing so well there. Became common sense to, say, the government of England and innumerable other countries. That's why they bought our product. They didn't buy it because they particularly were buying into my German PhD and my cross-country skiing or Palantir's narrative or anything. In fact, many cases they bought it despite that. Most cases, maybe. But they learned, software is not something that exists on a PowerPoint purely. You must see it in action. And by the way, this was very much linked to other good decisions that were made. So it's like, it's a learning process. And then the question is, how quickly can an institution or society learn? And it's not, I don't think like where you think it's a question of new and old or a new, old, ancient. I think it's a question of how adaptive. Some older institutions are highly adaptive because they use their culture to reflect on their core values, and then they use those core values to be maximally flexible and adaptation. Some newer institutions, startups, whatever, in all areas, are actually highly rigid. And not flexible and not adaptive, and they fail. So it's like, I don't think it's a question of new, fresh, It's a question of how willing are you to absorb an idea that looks odd to you and test it under quantitative considerations and then learn from the output. And institutions and societies that can do that are going to dramatically outperform. And then there's another thing here that just is not believed at a common sense level. So what I just said, people are like, yeah, okay, that makes sense, and blah, blah, blah. But people, lay non-software people, just view software as normal technology. So like one camera is 20% better than another camera, but then they capture that difference mostly in price. So maybe you pay 30% more for a 20% more better camera. And then if you've got lots of tendies that you don't care, but if you're highly technical, you find the camera that costs 20% less, that's 10% better, or that'd be more like the engineering approach. And then you build some new thing into it and you've got the best camera in the world at a cheaper price, right? So, but software is not like that. It's like, it is the best software in the world it's binary. Like if you look at the way we build software, like using, revisioning database, the way in which people write software and using it to manage data. Okay. That approach is not just 20%, it's not 20% better. It's like creates a new world that in its output can go into do things simultaneously that are maximally contradictory to most people, like being able to rebuild the whole supply chain of a country while protecting civil liberties norms and being able to verify that to third parties while applying both technical, like physics models to supply chain and human analytics for people that are doing is like simultaneously. So this is like the lay way of saying it would be it's like 1,000 times better. It's not even 1,000. It's like you create a completely different world. And people struggle with this because the common sense version of it is, well, it's like hiring a lawyer or buying a camera. You kind of roughly get what you pay for. It's priced so you could hire more hours from the bad lawyer and it'll be almost as good as the good lawyer. Or like the technical version is, like buying a car, blah, blah, blah. That's just not how software works. And it leads to massive societal problems because, of course, it leads to massive societal inequality. And so that's like a separate issue that we as a society have to deal with. But you can't just pretend that the inequality is not being is not just the result of like, it's just a completely different way of doing business. It's like, and so these are obviously Palantir's involved in like making non-technical people behave as if they were technical, meaning their actual value in the workplace goes up and they'll live better and they're less replaceable. And that's one of the reasons we've been so adopted by industrials that have highly trained workers like auto manufacturers and others. But in any case, the societal problem is that people implicitly have a deep belief in something that's no longer true, which is that these things are linear and captured in price. And so the political equivalent is that they're like, these things are less disruptive than they are. The business equivalent of it is people assume that one piece of software and the ability to implement it is going to be roughly the same. So you can leave your structures the same, but then you capture the value by lowering the price, when in fact, it's like if you installed the right software in COVID, you saved thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. Yeah. And if you didn't, you didn't. Yeah. And so it's like, and that's just not the common sense. And then the financial equivalent would be, they think you can capture the value of the software purely by looking at the growth, which, you notice our growth and all these things are quite favorable. Yeah. But in fact, that's just not, that just completely misses the beast. It's like not actually how this works, which is where like the technical people thinking about and hopefully joining our company and staying are much closer to the means of production than the people who are in charge of evaluating the means of production.
Are there countries that, you're saying America is like leading on being adaptive and learning and listening to new crazy ideas? Are there any countries in the pandemic that have surprised you and how more adaptive, or who are your favorites? Well, look, what are you most excited about?
Our product is used widely in the US, the UK, Israel, and a number of other countries that seem to have also been good at purchasing the vaccine. Yeah. And so what has surprised me is it seems the ability to purchase software and the ability to make other technical decisions seems, it's not a question of causation, but it does seem more correlated than I would have imagined. Much more correlated. And that really surprises me. So this is why I think we should be even more passionate about teaching people, not just so they buy Palantir, but like one of the purposes of like, it's like we must teach people who are not interacting with software how this works, because it seems to be highly correlated to making other decisions that are, quite frankly, life and death decisions. And even when they're not life and death, it's like survival of your industry. We're powering industries that, hire hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. And independent of the ability to evaluate software products, it seems, again, much more correlated than I would have imagined. The ability to evaluate software and the ability to evaluate, well, what should I do under these decisions involving a technical product, like a vaccine, and under what conditions do you purchase it and how you distribute it, is like, seems to be borderline causation, as if not, it's certainly strong correlation. And that's actually very much surprised me.